Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to the committee for the invitation today. And as the Chair outlined, joined by Jonathan Shinnors to my left and Dermot Kavanagh on the online. So, firstly, the Simon Communities of Ireland would like to thank the committee for the invitation. I suppose one of the first things was a couple of people have reflected on the fact that we were here in February of 22 giving an update, and I suppose we have to recognise the fact that we've had a 38% increase in homelessness in the intervening period. But I think, as Mary's outlined, really that's the consequence of a housing crisis. The needs of people who are in acute housing need are not being met by our housing system, and that's really what needs to be improved, fixed. But there's also, we have to recognise the trauma that people experience when they cross the threshold of a homeless service, and that's regardless of how professional the quality of the services that are provided by the Simon communities across Ireland. It is still a trauma, and the longer people have to spend in homelessness, the more acute the consequences of that homelessness is for them. And I suppose that's really what we'll talk a little bit about today. We forgive me, join with Mary in saying that prevention is absolutely key. And add to that we need to continue to innovate in that space. I think the tenant in situ is a particularly welcome innovation, and to seeing it rolled out will see results and is seeing results already, but it does need to be a continued and sustained momentum on it. We've obviously proposed over time a number of different innovations, including the Simon Homeless Prevention Bill, which received cross-party support. A number of innovations from Cork Simon, from rehab to home, which is supporting people to move from rehab directly into homes as opposed to having to go back to homeless services where you can have relapses. In Midwest, they're developing a shared living arrangement. They're working with the local authorities and sort of making the most of the accommodation that we have, and where people are compatible and providing shared living arrangements that can be provide homes quickly. The Homeless Prevention Service in Galway, Simon, which is predicated on the traditional homeless services, but also has an element of mentoring, where we're working with people to find the solutions and support them to work their way through homelessness, even prevent them from coming into homelessness in the first instance. And in 2022, that had a 94% success rate for people who engaged with the service and engaged early. And there's also, in Cork Simon, there's developing a pilot diversion project. A number of local authorities already engage in these diversion projects, where they will support people to find maybe alternative accommodation within family and friends, look at what other options they may have. And I suppose the Cork Simon wants to build on that to make sure that it's where supports are needed, that those supports can be put in place to make that more sustainable. Obviously, the most recent homeless figures did see an increase in family homelessness, and we don't want to put 1 month as a barometer or a defining notion, but it was concerning that the number of families, the increase in family homelessness was one of the highest we've seen since 2018. But I think the tenant in situ scheme is an appropriate response to that, and hopefully in the coming months we will see the impact of that we won't see that continue to increase. But it is, I suppose, it was a bit of a red flag when we saw that coming up, and certainly the experience of the Simon communities across the country is more and more families contacting them with a notice to quit, which they're being referred to the local authority, just to make that clear. That's the first action, but there is grave concerns around that. Both John Mark and Mary have covered a lot on the private rental market, so I won't go too far into that, other than to say HAP, clearly we're seeing a reduction in the total number of HAP properties in the country. And I suppose one of the aspects of it is the push to see increase in HAP rates. That's not necessarily to suppose that if we increase HAP rates that we can chase rents and that we can build up a bigger private rental stock of social housing through HAP. But I think what is really important is that we're making sure that people aren't falling into arrears because the HAP rates are so far away from market rents, and I think that's something that constantly has to be kept under review. One of the other things we wanted to talk about was the provision and the quality of private emergency accommodation. Again, Mary has outlined in a number of areas there, and there is ongoing work in the National Homeless Action Committee on this. But I suppose one of the things that we're seeing in the context of the crisis is the pressure coming on services to provide more and more bed spaces in existing services. And I think reflecting on where we came from in COVID, which I know was we acknowledge was a particular time, but the space that was provided, the reduction in the number of people in services, created better spaces for people to have better opportunity to move on from homelessness because they have the capacity. And again, in Midwest, we're particularly seeing that where people are gaining employment even though they're in emergency accommodation because they do have own room accommodation. When it comes to, the employment is also a factor that we're seeing generally increase. That is, people who are presenting to homelessness are presenting in employment, and that's something that's been seen in Midwest, in Cork Simon, and in Galway Simon, particularly in youth services, where we're seeing young people able to gain employment even though they're in emergency or supported accommodation. I suppose the notable factor of that is no longer a route out of homelessness, which some years ago it would have been. One of the things to raise, and this is an ongoing discussion that the NGO sector is having across, and we support those calls around Section 39 and Section 10 funding for homeless services. I suppose we're acutely aware that the professional staff in the Simon communities across the country, and indeed in all of the other NGOs, we're seeing at some degree a brain drain as the employment market is drawing those people out of our services into the HSE and TUSLA, where they can do the same work but yet get a very significant increase in pay. And that's because the pay parity that existed prior to 2008 has not been restored for frontline workers in NGOs, and we think that's something that really needs to be looked at. One, in recognition of the pressure that's on services, the pressure that's on staff, and two, in recognition of the professionalism and skill that's needed to support people who are living through the crisis of homelessness. Also the fact that the cost of living crisis, which is affecting everyone, is also affecting frontline workers. So just in conclusion, what I've covered here today is, it's a whistle-stop tour of some of the issues, but obviously we're very happy to take questions, and my colleagues have that very frontline experience to bring that home to the committee if as you wish. Happy to take questions.